All right, here we go. I think this is session 8, right? This is session 8. It will be the last session for looking at specific texts in Deuteronomy, but then I think I need to take 1 week to wrap up, draw some things together, go back to what we looked at early regarding the law, the uses of the law, for example. I want to come back to that, maybe help us think through a couple of things. And then we need suggestions about what next. I've got an idea. It's a little bit different than what we've been doing, but I can wait on that. If somebody got a burning question, there's the girl with the pearl earring.
Yes.
Sorry, I saw a shiny thing and was distracted. Yeah, so you got anything burning in you that you'd like to try?
For study, you mean?
Yeah, for a study, sorry, yeah. Yeah. Well, you think about it and maybe Joni, help me remember to ask again before we finish up. And if you think of something while we're talking, then just sound it out. Let me tell you what I'm thinking. I have recently read a book. I've worked through it twice. It's really, really interesting. It's very scholarly. It's not the sort of thing that I think we would want to read as a group, but I would be willing to try to talk through it. If you know that, I know kind of how that sounds, but it has some really interesting. The title of the book is The Holy Spirit and Christian Experience. And that's the thing. The book really is about, the title is exactly what the book is about. And how do we experience the sanctifying work of the Holy Spirit? And I could try that. And, it would get us sort of looking at John Wesley again. This guy, I think, doesn't quite grasp John Wesley. And so that's interesting to me. But I think he's incredibly insightful, and he draws on Martin Luther and some other people like that. And I thought, since we just sort of looked at Luther and Calvin in this study, that might be not only interesting, but edifying, because, well, that's it. The book gets into that part of our experience that's really about our feelings and how we respond to situations and things like that. So it's not just psychology, but he wants the book to be very practical, and in that sense, it is very practical, because he's trying to get down to where people actually live. How do we actually experience the Holy Spirit in the Christian life, in the way we live? How does that show up? How do we know and recognize the Spirit's work? So it would be that kind of focus, and that's my idea. And if that sounds interesting, we can do it. If it doesn't, we'll find something else. So always glad for your suggestions. All right.
I think it sounds good.
Yeah, I like it.
Okay, well, if I don't hear any objections, we'll maybe plan on that, but let me give you time to keep thinking, and anybody can share. So here we go with tonight. We're going to look at Deuteronomy 24, verses 4 through 22. 5, excuse me, 5 through 22. And Joni, Deuteronomy 24, excuse me. Deuteronomy 24, 5 through 22. Now, I put these questions. I have 2 questions as we're going to work through these verses. They have specific topics, and this is a case of, well, we just don't operate that way anymore. We don't operate. Our economy doesn't operate that way. A lot of things that would be like, we would look at that and go, But what I'd like us to do as we're reading, and then we'll work through these verses, let's try to think about what the personal benefit is in these laws for the people referenced, the widow, the orphan. What's the personal benefit? And then the other part of this is, let's just think out loud about the social implications, or you might say, what's the benefit to society? In relation to these laws. And so, okay, Joni, 24, 5-22.
When a man is newly married, he shall not go out with the army or be liable for any other public duty. He shall be free at home 1 year to be happy with his wife whom he has taken. No one shall take a mill or an upper millstone in pledge, for that would be taking a life in pledge. If a man is found stealing one of his brothers of the people of Israel,
So kidnapping.
okay, and if he treats him as a slave or sells him, then that thief shall die. So you shall purge the evil from your midst. Take care, in a case of leprous disease, to be very careful to do according to all that the Levitical priest shall direct you. As I commanded them, so you shall be careful to do. Remember what the Lord your God did to Miriam on the way as you came out of Egypt. When you make your neighbor a loan of any sort, you shall not go into his house to collect his pledge. You shall stand outside, and the man to whom you make the loan shall bring the pledge out to you. And if he is a poor man, you shall not sleep in his pledge. You shall restore him the pledge as the sun sets, that he may sleep in his coat and bless you, and it shall be righteousness for you before the Lord your God. You shall not oppress a hired worker who is poor and needy, whether he is one of your brothers or one of the sojourners who are in your land within your towns. You shall give him his wages on the same day before the sun sets, for he is poor and counts on it, lest he cry against you to the Lord and you be guilty of sin. Fathers shall not be put to death because of their children, nor shall children be put to death because of their fathers. Each one shall be put to death for his own sin. You shall not perverse the justice due to the sojourner or to the fatherless, or take a widow's garment in pledge. But you shall remember that you were a slave in Egypt, and the Lord your God redeemed you from there. Therefore, I command you to do this. When you reap your harvest in your field and forget a sheep in the field, you shall not go back to get it. It shall be for the sojourner, the fatherless, and the widow, that the Lord your God may bless you in all the work of your hands. When you beat your olive trees, you shall not go over them again. It shall be for the sojourner, the fatherless, and the widow. When you gather the grapes of your vineyard, you shall not strip it afterward. It shall be for the sojourner, the fatherless, and the widow. You shall remember that you were a slave in the land of Egypt. Therefore, I command you to do this.
Okay, just a little bit of a structural observation. Did you notice the repetition there? Okay, the repetition always gives a certain kind of emphasis. And imagine when you read it like that, and the law would have been read, right? You pick out the emphasis there. And then there's a sort of a, sometimes the commentators refer to it as like an envelope sort of structure, where it mentions that in verse 18, remember you were a slave in Egypt, etc. And then at the bottom, remember that you were a slave in the land of Egypt. So what's going on between there is a way of sort of focusing attention. Now I don't think there's any need for us to set those verses apart. We're just going to look at this passage, and we could have picked any number of texts like this. But again, let's go back to verse 5 now, and let's look at just verse 5 and ask these two questions. And what version were you reading from?
The ESV, the English.
Yeah, okay, yeah, the English Standard Version, yeah. Because it started out sounding exactly like the New Revised Standard, but then it switched, so. Okay, when a man is newly married, he shall not go out with the army or be charged with any related duty. He shall be free at home 1 year to be happy with the wife whom he has married. Personal benefit.
It shall remain unspoken.
Okay, well, we'll probably have to speak about parts of it anyway. Yeah. Yeah, but imagine this, just think out loud here a little bit. Imagine this. Young man gets married and he's free from military service for 1 year. Sorry?
And public duty.
Yeah, okay.
That,
Why do you, go ahead.
well, that gives an opportunity for a pregnancy. For an,
Yes.
Ah,
and
pre-
if he goes off to war and is killed, there's, no heir. So it gives him, that's what I think.
yeah, yeah, that's really key to this law. Yeah, so you could expect a pregnancy to happen within the year, so hopefully it's a male child who's born, who can carry on the family line. And that's really, I mean, that's the way the economy, it's the way the society functioned. And so here is a law that's in one sense generous, that is an attempt, so far as anybody is able, to guarantee that this man and his family will continue.
So Steve,
Yeah.
if it was a daughter and the daughter grew up and married, would the daughter's family take the mother? Like, would the new son-in-law now be, you think kind of Ruth and Naomi. Ruth marrying Boaz provided Naomi also.
Okay, so if they had a daughter instead of a son,
Uh-huh.
and so now the mom is a widow because her husband,
Well, she's not a widow. Well, yes, she's a widow.
Yeah.
But she has a daughter.
right, a daughter instead of a son.
Who then marries, does that son-in-law then also accept responsibility for the mother?
Well, yes, but let's maybe qualify that a little bit. So probably if husband goes off to war and gets killed, she's a young woman. The widow is a young woman
Okay,
and likely will remarry,
I see, okay.
right? Or if the deceased has a brother, then maybe the law of levirate marriage. I mean, that's still marriage, but it might be something like that. But she would be free to marry again and have the social support that way. But if not, somehow, then yeah, then the other family members would care for her. Yeah. Okay, so there's the personal benefit. Obviously for this family, and keeping in mind that the extended family is really that's the basic social unit, right? It's not just mom and dad and kids, it's the generations in that family. But the family then is taking care of family members, and that's the first line of support if something tragic like this were to happen. So, in kind of modern ears, we're thinking, well, he just gets a year off, right? Well, that's nice, but why? Well, there's actually a very practical reason for this law. It does seem very generous, but it also, let's get to the social benefit of allowing for this sort of gap year, let's call it, from military service to happen. Any thoughts? How does this benefit think village, think tribe, think,
It increases the size, the population.
right? And how would that be a benefit?
Well, I mean, you're always looking for more population. I think that was always the goal.
Okay. Workers,
Yeah.
Yeah.
Or if it's a girl, more mothers.
yep, yep. And women, another thing I'd like to do maybe is, there's a scholar named Carol Myers who's done a lot of work on the role and status of women in ancient Israel and into the first, Israel at the time of Jesus and all that, and that's fascinating too. So we might consider something like that too. But okay, so there's that. But if this guy, they get married, they're newlyweds, and he has to go right away off to war, and he's killed, what then does the society have to do?
Take in.
Take care of the
They've got
mom.
to take care of a widow. Right? They've got to take care of a widow. If there's no family, they've got a widow to take care of. But even if there is a family, it's still, you've got widows. And of course, we're gonna look at widows.
Did men,
Yeah.
You go.
did men actually help out around the home back then, or did the wife just have a man that's, well, watching TV or whatever he was doing? For the year?
Yeah, this is a great question. No, the man is working. And I mean, there clearly were identifiable roles for the men and for the women, but there was some overlap, and basically everybody's working all the time, doing something, right? So, you know, this, I think it's exceedingly unlikely that the men are helping knead the dough to make the bread. But they are farming. But women could go out and help with the harvest, right? I mean, any farm family knows when it's harvest time, everybody pitches in. That's true today as much as it was a couple of thousand years ago. But otherwise, there were, you know, pretty clearly identified roles for the men and pretty clearly identified roles for the women. And people did things communally. They did a lot of things together, like there'd be like baking bread. There would be an oven for several families, maybe. And so the women are getting together. There's a lot going on besides just the task of baking bread.
Steve,
Yeah,
I think also of the, you know, a newlywed couple, that just getting your feet under you in terms of economically. Get your farm
right.
in good order, get your house in good order, you know, all the stuff. I mean, think of all the stuff that happens in the first year. In the first year of a family, you know, the first few years of a family.
Right.
So I mean, and the fact that this says, give him a year to be happy with his wife or to make his wife happy.
Right.
I don't think it's all economic.
No.
It's also like an emotional thing. It's like
Right.
an emotional gift, so to speak.
Yeah, because they, you know, I mean, there's a good chance that this is at some level an arranged marriage. So the marriage itself is a family kind of communal thing, the pulling together of these two people. Yeah, so they need a year to get to know each other and, you know, work those things out. Okay, so we've done that one. Let's look, I've grouped two different sections here. So verse 6 and then 10 through 13, because this is all about taking a pledge. No one shall take a mill or an upper millstone in pledge, for that would be taking a life in pledge. Now, let me stop there. Some of you, I'm sure, are very well familiar with the technology here. There are different kinds of millstones, right? You can do the mortar and pestle, where you've got like you've got a hand. Which is the mortar and which is the pestle?
I always thought the mortar was the bowl.
The bowl?
Yeah.
The mortar, okay, the mortar's the bowl. So imagine a stone that's hollowed out. And then you've got some kind of like a rolling pin type thing to crush the grain in that. So there's that, but then you can get bigger ones that are still powered by human effort. So imagine, you know, I haven't studied this enough to know the terms. All of these pieces have terms. So the upper millstone, there's some kind of vertical tube. So you dump the grain in here, it's trickling down and it comes out the bottom. There's a gap in the bottom. So the grain is slowly being fed out into a circular stone with has like a trough on it. a trench to hold it in, and then the upper millstone is a circular, a heavy stone that you push, you roll around in the circle, and it's grinding the grain as you roll it around, and you're scooping the flour out, and more grain trickles down into the trench. Then that's there are very different kinds of mills, but that's a fairly common one for the period of time we're looking at. Okay, so imagine I owe you money, right? And I got nothing. I have nothing. The only thing I can give you is the upper millstone. I can give you a part of my technology that produces food for me. And you see why that would be a pledge, right? Why would that be a pledge?
A pledge for what?
For a
They
loan.
would want, he would want it back enough to be sure he paid his debt.
Exactly, right? If I give you a part of the thing that, helps me make food, I'm gonna need that back, and so I'm gonna be sure to pay you to get it back, right? Okay,
So a pledge is like, collateral.
yeah, it's collateral, right?
Oh,
A pledge is a promise that I'm gonna pay you. And it's a promise in the form of something material that I own. Okay. So what is the personal benefit then for the debtor in this picture with this law?
Well, the law is saying you can't be punitive in loaning your money, basically.
Right.
You righteous and gracious and just, but not punitive.
Okay. Any other ideas there? Yeah, that's good. Any other ideas? What does the whole verse say? Notice what the verse says further.
Says it's like taking a life as security.
Yeah, you're actually taking the guy's livelihood. That's as we say sometimes, that's a bridge too far. You can't. This is sort of like payday loans, right? When you take a millstone like that in pledge, the guy can't do anything. You're kind of consigning him to absolute disaster. So you can't take that as a pledge. Come up with something else. Okay, let's go to 10 through 13. Since we're talking about pledges, when you make your neighbor a loan of any kind, you shall not go into the house to take the pledge. You shall wait outside while the person to whom you are making the loan brings the pledge out to you. Now, isn't that interesting? Why in the world is that part of the law? Okay, he has to bring the collateral out to you. You don't get to go in his house. Why?
you don't own him. His stuff is still his house. His house is still his own house.
Okay,
You don't have the right to take more,
yeah,
than the pledge.
right. And if he's, yeah, good. Any other thoughts there?
Can't be accused of stealing.
Okay, that's true. Yeah, I can't, right. I can't pilfer anything else while I'm in there if I don't go in.
Or bother him with the incessant, you owe me.
Yeah, yeah,
I think it has a little bit to do with just being gracious to poor people and not and letting them save face in the dilemma that they're in.
there you go. I think that's really key here. So dignity for the impoverished person, some dignity. That house may be the last thing he's got. And it's a little bit like a boundary, right? It's the last bit of dignity the debtor may have. And now we're going to come back at the end to some questions about how do these laws reveal God's nature. But here's a good example where we could start thinking about how these laws start to show us something about God's nature. Okay, I found that, yeah,
Can I just add one quick?
sure.
And we find it hard to relate to, I think. Because we are so individualistic. And that was the culture was much more communal. The relationships between each of the people as a community was really more important than your relationship with somebody you owe money to or back, whatever. And we missed that communal sense,
Right.
I think, very easily.
Yeah, that's so how this benefits the community is that the social cohesion remains strong. You're not introducing fractures in relationships that are gonna leak out into the
And
community.
split the community.
Right. Everybody still has their dignity. And this may be, last week Joanne mentioned the honor shame thing. This may be an example where the debtor's honor is being protected a little bit by this law. Because it would be, if I'm so down on my luck that I need to borrow from a neighbor, that just doesn't feel good, does it? I remember I'd gone back to grad school, you know, we were young and had these little kids and we'd moved up to Illinois and you know, it's the case of you think you know how it's all gonna work out and then you get up there and oh, this is different and that's different. And you know, we just cash flow wasn't happening, right? So I had to ask someone to borrow money for period of time. That's one thing to get a student loan, you know, I got a student loan, of course, but this extra surprising kind of gap that we had, I had to see if I could figure out how to cover it. And boy, while I owed that guy that money, I was just,
Not at peace.
I just was really miserable. I was so glad to pay that thing off. So anyway, okay. If the person, verse 12, if the person is poor, you shall not sleep in the garment given you as the pledge. You shall give the pledge back by sunset, so that your neighbor may sleep in the cloak and bless you. And it will be to your credit before the Lord your God, or accredited to you as righteousness. Okay, so let's kind of describe what seems fairly obvious, but let's go ahead and say what kind of picture are we seeing here with the nature of the loan and the kind of the level and degree of the loan? What do you?
Well, he's nothing left. If all he
Yeah.
has left is his cloak.
Zach,
Desperation, right?
exactly. If I've got nothing left except the cloak that I stay warm with, I'm really desperate. Okay, so how does the creditor act in this case?
With
With
mercy,
charity?
gives it back.
So the law requires that he give it back for the night. Now, does that mean he can have it during the day, the next day? I think it probably does, you know, but he can't keep it. He can't make the guy suffer in the cold. You know, if the guy can't pay him back the next day, then he still has it as a pledge, but he can't keep it at night. That's how I read it. I don't really know if, you know, if that's the case. I think it probably is. Okay, so we can see the kind of obvious personal benefit here, but what about back to society? What's kind of the big picture we're seeing in these injunctions? Big picture principles about the benefit to the society.
I think the one thing that isn't really explicit here is that that when you loan someone, it is reasonable to expect to be paid back.
Yeah,
So it's not a word against being paid back.
correct,
You know what I mean?
right,
It's not saying I just forget it.
right,
It's setting limits on how you can expect payment back, you
right,
know?
right. Yeah, and what do those limits do for the society?
Keep
It
somebody
gives
from
people their
taking
dignity. Keeps people on the same level.
All right, what were you gonna, that's good, we'll gather these up here. Linda, were you gonna say something?
I said it keeps them from taking advantage of other people.
Okay. Was somebody else gonna say something, Deborah, or maybe?
I was thinking, it doesn't allow greed. It tampers greed. You can't just take whatever you want.
Okay, yeah. Yeah,
It makes me think of debtor's prison in England, and how in the world did they ever get there? You know,
Right.
how do you get to a place where putting someone in prison because that they can't pay their debts is a good idea?
well, that's where they're, you put the debtor in prison, their family is supposed to, their family or some friend that takes pity. Yeah.
Yeah.
But it's cruel.
Yeah.
The idea that there are limits on what the creditor can exact in this economic relationship. Yeah, so I think Larry's point about it sort of puts people a little bit more on a little bit more even. You still have the person making the loan, the person receiving the loan, but there's a kind of tying them together in certain ways. That I think would be, I mean, imagine a village where these commandments are being followed. Nobody's gonna get too low that they're so desperate that they might do some wrong things, and nobody's gonna get so high that they think they're somehow the rules don't apply to them and they can just do what they want. They'll get their money one way or another. Okay, so here we have laws governing the pledge, right? Taking money in pledge. So that got me thinking about the wisdom literature in the book of Proverbs. It has something to say in the book of Proverbs about this. So let's look at Proverbs 17:18. Again, I'm reading New Revised Standard here. It is senseless to give a pledge, or this is repeating now. So, this is the kind of typical Hebrew parallelism. So saying essentially the same thing, to become surety for a neighbor. Right? So it is not wise to say, okay, to the creditor, okay, I'll cover that for him, right? I'll be the one to make sure you get your money. And the proverb is suggesting, isn't it, that that's not really a good idea.
Steve,
Yeah,
way back in the 1800s or maybe early 1900s, Les's great-grandfather, one of the other parishioners at the church he went to, asked him to co-sign $1,000 loan with him for something in the farm. And the guy then, before he paid back the debt, killed himself. And so his great grandfather ended up having to pay off that $1,000 debt. And in that day and age, that was a whale of a lot of money.
Yeah, that's,
Gosh,
yeah.
oh my gosh.
Okay, so here we have the scriptures offering angles of understanding on this, this exchange, this relationship, this agreement, this promise. And well, I won't say any more about that. Let's go ahead and look at Proverbs 20, verse 16. This is where reading Proverbs gets tricky. We don't want to draw a hasty conclusion. Okay, take the garment of one who has given surety for a stranger. Seize the pledge given as surety for foreigners. Take the garment of one who has given surety for a stranger. Can we set up the, what's the relationship that's being described here?
So
Mine reads different enough from yours. that
Okay, well, read yours.
It just says, take a man's garment when he has put up security for a stranger.
So, yeah, that's what mine says.
Okay,
Yeah,
it didn't sound the same.
yeah.
well, so a stranger needs to borrow and you voluntarily
Mhm.
put up the collateral for it.
I'm promising, okay, I will agree to cover this man's debt if he doesn't pay it back. That makes me, I'm the surety, right? I'm the collateral. So then as I read this, then the creditor says to the guy who says, I'll cover that guy's debt, okay, you give me your cloak. Right? Because this is risky, isn't it? There are
Yep.
three people involved. And one of them is a stranger, a foreigner, right? The word foreigner here, we're not talking about, probably, in this case, we're not talking about the sojourner, the foreigner who lives among us and we've gotten to know. We're talking about somebody we don't know. So I think in this picture, the wisdom is you have to be careful about the promises you make on behalf of someone else. Right? Because you could really be taken advantage of, and the creditor also could be. So the person who says, I'll cover that guy's debt has to give some kind of pledge to the creditor to show good faith, I will cover it. And who wants to give away their cloak? Right?
Kind of like co-signing a loan. If that person doesn't pay, you're on the hook for it.
Yeah.
So,
Right.
Yep.
That's exactly right.
So is that proverb also a comment about knowing people, like if it's a foreigner, that you can see there's a lack of wisdom in offering to cover for someone you don't know their character.
Yeah, I think the proverb is cautioning.
Mhm.
Don't be rash with your money, right? Don't be rash. The interesting thing to me is clearly from the book of Deuteronomy, in real life society, people are borrowing and having to give pledges. They're having to show that they're good for paying off the debt. So this sort of stuff is happening. And the wisdom material, let's go ahead and read the Proverbs 22, verse 26. This is very pointed, this one. Do not be one of those who give pledges, who become surety for debts. Don't do it. Now, the interesting thing to me about this one is it actually, the proverb runs two directions. The one direction is if I become surety for someone else's debt, like Linda was talking about, I risk that person defaults and I'm on the hook for it. I'm stuck, or that person can't pay it off. That's one way. The other way is some people have figured out how to make money by being surety for people, right? A little extra cut from the payback. Now, I don't know, again, I think this is a case of where the proverb is meant to be, you know, it's a little bit of a riddle. It opens up ways of thinking to try to deal with another angle of vision on real life experiences. So back to Deuteronomy, we know these things are really happening where people are making pledges. Some people are acting, you know, providing surety for the other person. So it's happening. And the writers of Proverbs are watching these things happen and seeing the negative outcomes sometimes, right? So cautioning, be careful about how you do this.
Steve,
Yeah.
I hate to beat a dead horse.
Oh, beat it.
Through all of these, what you're looking at is broken relationships within the community based on money, on ability to pay back, borrow, etc.
Right.
And the significance of the community and the health of the community, I think, underlies all of that.
Yeah.
Because when you start stratifying, you're going to have, some people have better ground than other people. And they're going to end up with more money than these other people.
Right.
And what you end up doing, you look around in our economy, is you end up with the stratification of wealth, of power, of prestige, etc.
Yeah.
And I think much of what underlies this is to keep each of us on the same plane as much as possible, recognizing that, yes, you have more than I have or whatever, but governing not so much how we take care of each other, but the fact that we do take care of each other and we maintain community.
Right. Yeah, I mean, it looks to me like there would be a pretty clear practical benefit living in a culture, a society where this sort of, these relationships followed these principles. For exactly the reason you're talking about, because some people did succeed, other people struggled and they had to sell their land. And this is where some other laws, right? The 7th year, that land goes back to the family. The Jubilee year, which most scholars say the Jubilee year, the 50 year, when all debts are off, right? All debts are off. Probably they didn't really observe the Jubilee year, but there must have been some way to course correct so that no family gets too far down as to become so destitute that they have really no recourse except to sell themselves, you know, into slavery or something else. All right, continuing on, same questions, the personal benefit, the social implication, kidnapping. I mean, this seems almost unthinkable, right? But how might it relate to these other injunctions about pledges and loans and things like that?
Well, I suppose if you were evil enough and somebody didn't pay you, you could kidnap either them or a person in their family and sell that person.
Oh, golly.
Yeah, this is like the mafia. Right? You don't pay me back, you can't pay me back, okay. Don't you go to sleep. Right? So that, yeah, and how does the law describe that kind of action then?
Death sentence. You shall die for doing that.
Yeah. Yeah, because this kind of behavior is so horrible that it pollutes the land. Right? So
But-
there's an added dimension of seriousness.
It's
to this.
treating a brother as having no worth.
Right,
It's, it's treating a brother as if, yeah, it just totally demeans and dehumanizes them. So
right.
no value.
So here's another example then of how the law puts limits on behaviors. It's like the law we looked at last week, the law of vengeance, lex talionis, eye for eye, tooth for tooth. There's a proportionality to it. There's a boundary. You can't go any further than this. And that's, no matter how indebted the person is, and no matter how frustrated I might be because the person's not paying me back, I cannot resort to this dehumanizing, inhumane, cruel way of solving my problem. Yes, so I think the personal and social benefits and implications are pretty obvious there. Okay, skin diseases, verses 8 and 9. Guard against an outbreak of a leprous skin disease. And the use of the word leprous here, a lot of the commentators say what we think of as leprosy, it's called Hansen's disease, the leper colonies and all that. And this is in Ben-Hur, right? Isn't it Ben-Hur? Is it Ben-Hur? Or is it The Robe? One of those old movies from the 50s.
I think it's a robe.
Where, people are in the leper colony. And it's like the leper colony we would imagine in India. And a lot of the commentators say that, that sort of leprosy was unknown. However, skin diseases were quite common. And nobody really knew for sure how contagious. I mean, with experience, you would know this one is more contagious than this other one. But you really need, you need somebody who's kind of practiced at diagnosing, and that's the priest. And we find these laws about skin diseases elsewhere. We're not going to take the time to look at those because I want to make sure I get through the last part of this lesson. But what would be the personal benefit?
Well, if it wasn't something serious, you wouldn't be ostracized from the whole community.
So you'd be restored if you followed the.
Right. So the goal is restoration here. That's right. If you have a skin disease, you've got to follow what the law says, but the purpose of the law is to, to get you cleaned up and then back in the community.
I'm sure the purpose of the, take care and stay away from other people is to keep from having a plague of some sort go through, because so many, we're thinking of things like chicken pox and smallpox and measles. I mean, these are skin diseases to them. We don't, they don't, well, I assume they didn't know anyway.
Yeah.
So these are all very contagious. And if you don't obey the laws, it's going to go through like crazy.
Right. Yeah. Yeah, just think about back when COVID was really still, excuse me, extremely prevalent and still not, we didn't quite know. A lot of people were dying. We didn't quite know. So, I mean, oh, I have COVID. Oh yeah, come on in. No way. Yeah, so again, obvious social benefit here. This is one way. This is like a health law, that protects the community.
But then throw in the sentence about remember what the Lord your God did to Miriam on the way as you came out of Egypt.
Okay, that I wasn't going to go there, but since you went there, let's look at Numbers 12, verse 1, and then 5 through 10. And this shows us why that one's mentioned. So verse 1, while they were at Hazeroth, Miriam and Aaron spoke against Moses because of the Cushite woman who he had married. Now, verse 5, then the Lord came down in a pillar of cloud and stood at the entrance of the tent and called Aaron and Miriam, and they both came forward. And he said, hear my words. When there are prophets among you, I, the Lord, make myself known to them in visions. I speak to them in dreams. Not so with my servant Moses. He is entrusted with all my house. With him I speak face to face, clearly, not in riddles, and he beholds the form of the Lord. Now the Lord says to Miriam, why then were you not afraid to speak against my servant Moses? And the anger of the Lord was kindled against them, and he departed. When the cloud went away from over the tent, Miriam had become leprous, as white as snow. So you don't want to be like Miriam.
So don't not do what the priest tells you to do.
That's exactly right.
I see.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. Okay. 24, 14, and 15. You shall not withhold the wages of poor and needy laborers, whether other Israelites or aliens who reside in your land in one of your towns. You shall pay them their wages daily before sunset, because they are poor and their livelihood depends on them. Otherwise, they might cry to the Lord against you, and you would incur their guilt. Okay. So I wonder, these day laborers, I mean, we know day laborers quite well, right? People show up at a certain spot and hope to be hired that day. But in this time with, an agrarian economy where all the families are allotted land, there's a good chance that someone has lost their land, and now they're in a really tight spot and having to work for, a day-to-day wage.
Or even a sojourner as listed.
Yeah, sojourners, strangers in the land. That's for other reasons, because they don't have an allotment in the land, right? So the personal benefit is pretty clear here. Again, the social implication, the social benefit of doing it this way.
Well, if your day laborers know they're gonna get paid today, they're gonna come to work. They're gonna wanna go to work for you.
Yeah.
If they
Okay.
don't, if they think they might go to work for you and not get paid and not get paid and not get paid.
Yeah. Yeah, or if you do go to work for that guy and he doesn't pay,
Mhm.
resentment,
Mhm.
talking about that person, the resentment would spread. We're back to, Steve's, we've got similar kinds of issues with, the community starts to get torn down if people don't follow these injunctions, these principles.
Do you think that's, there is a unspoken thing in our society to pay your bills on time? Do you think this is where that came from?
Well,
Pay your bills on time.
I mean, generally, we get our laws generally from the Bible, really. I mean, there's quite a process of revision and modification and change and addition and all that, and drawing from other sources, but we are, as I find myself saying often recently, we're downstream from this, right? Or, yeah. But I think in one way, it just makes sense to pay your debt on time, because if you don't, you got all kinds of other trouble. There's just sort of a practical result. Okay, I want to get to my final question, so let's quickly do 24:16. Parents shall not be put to death for their children, nor children shall be put to death for their parents, only for their own crimes. And notice that word crimes, I mean, this is, right. Shall they be, may persons be put to death? All right, the 2 Kings 14 reference, it's King Amaziah. Well, let's just go there quickly, sorry.
2 Kings,
14, 5, and 6. So this is an example of where the king is following this law. This is Amaziah, as soon as the royal power was firmly in his hand, he killed his servants who had murdered his father, the king, but he did not put to death the children of the murderers, according to what is written in the book of the law of Moses, where the Lord commanded, the parents shall not be put to death for the children, etc. So there's a direct linkage to this law in 24. Now, the interesting thing about this is that there's this, and this was very common in the ancient world before these laws are established. Both among like Abraham's people, so the people that become Israel in the wider culture, the idea of a blood avenger. So a family member who for the sake of the family goes and finds the person who killed the family member, and you know, in a way, my job is to kill that person. So what we're getting in Deuteronomy is we're getting laws, again, to build fences around practices like this. You know, sort of, it's still happening, but we want to move them aside and have a society that's more justly governed. So the cities of refuge, back in Deuteronomy 19, is related to that blood avenger. So the person who accidentally kills someone guilty of manslaughter can go to the city and be there safely until time for the trial. The blood avenger can't just hunt him down and kill him. Okay, then very quickly, the resident alien, the widow, and the orphan. Why? Why do we care for the resident alien?
He has no family to look after him.
Steve's answer.
Yeah.
He has no land.
No land, and this is also a reminder, and it's very clear there, you were once strangers. So this is that equalizing thing again. We've been there. We know what this feels like. Okay? It's interesting, again, in Deuteronomy 7, we have God pretty much saying, all these foreigners in this land, when you go in and take it, don't have any mercy on them, right? So again, working with these scriptures where there's a little bit of tension from one to the other, we'd have to sort that out. And we're not going to do that. I just wanted to mention it. But the rationale for this law is you were the foreigner. You were the sojourner in Egypt. Okay, and then providing just basic needs, you know, people get to get some of the harvest. It would be interesting to try to figure out, you know, how would we do that in a money economy? Okay.
Well, though you do see during harvest time, during wheat harvest time, all the places where the corners, you know, the combine can't quite get to the corner, so they leave, you know, these patches of corners and, you know, it would be weird to be open for someone to go in and help themselves to, kind of thing.
Right.
I mean, that would be really weird.
Yeah. That
And
it's,
I don't know how much wheat that would be, but
that's legal and appropriate, right?
yeah,
Yeah.
yeah.
Okay, we're out of time, but let me just finish up this way. So one of the commentators I was looking at for this study, I'm paraphrasing here. The law is only as good as the people administering and observing it. So if we think about these commands that we've been looking at, the various situations and relationships that they're discussing, you can imagine people starting to try to take advantage, where the powerful and the wealthy try to take advantage of these laws. And these laws are designed, they build in boundaries, right? They're designed to prevent people from taking advantage of others, including strangers. Okay. So this is where I wanted to finish up. These are various and sundry laws. We Christians we're not really thinking about them exactly. I mean, we can see the transferable parts, right? But we're not going back to the law to figure out how we handle our business, right? Still, I thought it raises some good questions. What do these commands suggest about the nature of God?
God wants us to be merciful and loving,
But he also wants us to be just.
just, yes.
Right. And that's because he is merciful and loving and just, right? And these laws, they're not just rules, they're actually reflections of God's nature, what God is like. So God cares about the orphan and the widow and the sojourner. God cares about the poor and the people that are down on their luck and having a really hard time, And the laws of the land show what God cares about. The law doesn't criticize the rich. People get rich, right? They're successful. Some people are good at farming and others aren't so good. So the successful ones can be successful. But what we can't do is treat the people that are struggling, we can't treat them as if they're somehow not part of us. And that, I know I got to quit. So that third question, what do they suggest about the relationship with God and his people, right? So God's people need to reflect God's nature in the world, right? In the way they live with one another, in the way they conduct their business, in the way they handle economic problems and things like that. So I do think it's really, even though we're not going to try to just apply these verses in some kind of one-to-one, straightforward, literal way, I think there's a lot here that Christians can think about and realize, okay, so now today's people of God, the body of Christ, how might we embody God's nature in relation to these kinds of topics? I think it is a good thing for us to think about. And that's one of the reasons I thought coming back for one more pass at the nature and uses of the law and Christians' relationship to it, maybe taking looking again briefly and kind of drawing some of these things together, maybe one more session there, and then we can move on to whatever other topic. Has anybody thought of a topic besides the one that I shared? And we can give it a try. All right. Hearing none, we're going to go for it.
They're pretty much all good for me.
Okay, so next week we'll do the wrap up. This really will be the last time, Larry Newton. And then we'll move on to the Holy Spirit and the Christian life. Should be fun. Haha. Okay, take care, everybody.